Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And today, it sounds like Sony is ramping up for more studio acquisitions. Now, this might be a part of a larger strategic entertainment expansion for Sony, and this already has the community absolutely buzzing about all of the different possibilities. The speculation is already all over the place with some wild, crazy predictions. Now, I don't know how realistic some of these predictions actually are, but I do think that there's actually a small possibility Sony could maybe make a big splash, though not necessarily in the way the fans are maybe expecting. So we'll get into that a little bit later on today, as well as a Sega leak that points to them announcing a big game at the upcoming Xbox showcase. Plus, it sounds like they have something else in store that fans are going to go crazy over, specifically for you PlayStation fans out there, if any of this does turn out to be true. As always, though, do hit those buttons below, like, subscribe, and hit that bell. It does help out the channel a ton, and plus, it's a great way for you to stay up to date with all of the daily gaming news. With that said, though, you know it. Let's just go and jump right into it, starting off with the Nintendo 3DS. Of course, Nintendo axed the 3DS eShop a few months back, but Nintendo seemingly isn't too happy about how the store closure unfolded, because what happened here is the fans are like, okay, well, Nintendo's going to close the eShop anyways and kill off hundreds of games, some of which are digital exclusives to their eShop. So some fans are like, well, we might as well just go ahead and download custom firmware to do the things that we want. The 3DS is an easily exploitable console, and that's exactly why a lot of people went in that direction. And, you know, at the time, it seemed like Nintendo just didn't really care about this. They let it happen for a year straight, or at least until now. Here we are roughly 2 months after the eShop closure, and now all of a sudden, a new mysterious firmware update for the 3DS has appeared. Now, Nintendo themselves aren't exactly going into great detail about what this update includes, but according to some fan findings, what's happening here is that if you haven't already hacked your 3DS, this new update will keep you from doing so in the future. Nintendo fixed up practically every exploit that's on the popular 3DS hacks guide. Now, however, if you already have custom firmware, this update reportedly won't affect your 3DS specifically. But I think with that, there is a very real question on why you would even need to update your 3DS in the first place. Fans could ultimately just decide to not update their console until they decide on whether they want that custom firmware or not. Next up here, though, let's go and talk about Spider-Man 2. Obviously, this is one of the most anticipated 2023 titles, though as of right now, there's not really much known about this game. We haven't seen any gameplay or anything like that. That probably will change tomorrow with the PlayStation Showcase, just another reason to tune in. But for the time being, Insomniac Games did answer a rather surprising question on Twitter. I guess this has actually been in the rumor mill for quite some time, and the voice actor for Miles Morales recently seemed to tease it as well. But somebody on Twitter asked if Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is going to have a cooperative game mode, and Insomniac Games did respond. I think they were maybe just looking to shut this rumor down, if anything else, because they responded by saying, nope, it is an epic single-player adventure. I mean, I guess the idea here is interesting in theory, with there being two different Spider-Mans. You have Peter Parker and then Miles Morales. Theoretically, that could possibly work as a cooperative game, but I think if they were to go in that direction, you know, that could limit the scope of what they plan on doing with the story. I mean, I would fully expect Peter Parker and Miles Morales to have several missions in the story by themselves rather than together. So with that in mind, I think that it would be difficult to keep the entire game cooperative with both of them being playable at the same time from beginning to end, unless you just want to go ahead and clone Spider-Man for the sake of cooperative gameplay. However, that's just not in their plans here. Now, I guess they could also just make a completely separate game mode and just let you run wild in a city, but that's just not in their plans here. Their idea is to once again have that fully immersive single-player experience. And, I mean, just for me, I'm perfectly okay with that. The first game sold extraordinarily well, and then so did Miles Morales. So they're clearly doing something right, and I'd say with that, keep doing your thing, Insomniac. If anything else, though, I do fully expect them to lift the lid tomorrow at that PlayStation Showcase. Speaking of Sony, though, let's go and get into the big story of the day, and that is that Sony is preparing to ramp up for another acquisition spree. Now, if you've been paying close attention, I think this sometimes gets overlooked, but Sony has acquired 11 new PlayStation studios since 2019. Now, to just kind of put that into perspective, they only have 23 total studios. So nearly half of their studios have been acquired in just the last 4 years alone. It is a legitimate buying spree. Now, we'll come back to that here in just a second, but Sony, they don't appear to be slowing down whatsoever, but rather, it actually sounds like this is only going to continue in the coming years. The reason for that is because reportedly, Sony's president at a news conference addressed rumors that they could spin off its financial arm in order to ramp up its investment capabilities. His wording was, quote unquote, "In order to expand our growth over the medium to longer term, we will need the ability to invest in image sensors and the entertainment business at a completely new level." Now, if you're unaware though, what this partial spinoff means is that Sony, being the parent company, could actually list their financial arm as a subsidiary to increase their capital. More or less, this means they would retain a minority stake in their financial arm, all while giving them more money to invest in their other segments, such as the entertainment business, which of course includes PlayStation. That, however, is important to keep in mind here because from what we're hearing, Sony might be able to raise around $8 billion for different buyouts, which, that's a lot of money. Keep in mind that Microsoft acquired Bethesda for $7.5 billion. So you can absolutely acquire some pretty sizable studios for that type of money. But, and here's the thing, with that said, I think realistically, you have to understand that Sony is not just PlayStation. The PlayStation business is very important to them. Yes, absolutely. So you can expect some buyouts going forward, but they do acquire things outside of the PlayStation business as well. So theoretically, if they do raise $8 billion, that's not all going to go to the PlayStation business. As an example, with their most recent buying spree, Sony's acquired Crunchyroll for $1.2 billion, and then they also acquired EMI Music Publishing for $2.3 billion. So that's $3.5 billion right there. So that is important to keep in mind. I mean, there's some pretty wild predictions out there. I keep seeing fans speculate that Sony is going to acquire Take-Two, which in truth is very doubtful. I mean, Take-Two just a couple years ago picked up Zynga for $12 billion, the second biggest studio acquisition in history. That's not even including their own company's worth. So Take-Two would require a lot of money to buy, especially with GTA 6 incoming. So yeah, I think those predictions are a little outlandish here. Sony doesn't really have that type of money on hand. They would have to do something else to get a company like Take-Two. But what I think will happen here is that Sony will continue a very similar strategy as we've seen from them since 2019. What Sony seems to do is they like to target independent studios with a lot of upside, such as Haven Studios, and then they like to secure talent that they've worked with for a long period of time, such as Housemarque, Bluepoint, and most importantly, Insomniac Games. Now, they've also picked up some surprising studios along the way, such as Nixxes and Valkyrie Entertainment. Those were completely out of left field, but so far we haven't really seen them target those mega publishers like we've seen from Microsoft. And I don't really foresee that necessarily changing anytime soon. I think they will continue what they've been so successful at so far, and that's scouting talent from these promising independent studios and then fostering them into something more grand, like we've seen with Naughty Dog, like we've seen with Guerrilla Games, and with Sucker Punch. That's what Sony does so well, and is why they have the reputation they have today. They have world-class studios that they've helped build over a long period of time. Yes, they started out as acquisitions, but they helped foster them into the studios they are today. Now, with that said, if I were to make a prediction for a big splash buyout, I think one realistic scenario is to invest in Square Enix, though not necessarily the whole company as some might expect. A lot of their IP wouldn't necessarily be great for Sony, as I think that they fit Nintendo better, Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default as an example, but instead, Square Enix said something very interesting last year. They mentioned that they could sell stakes in their different individual studios, and this is where I think Sony could come in. Sony and Square Enix already have a tight relationship. That is very well known, and Sony has also made it clear that they want PlayStation to be known as the home for Final Fantasy. So I could see a scenario where Sony, instead of making deals for each individual Final Fantasy game like we've seen in the last few years, instead they could just invest into the Final Fantasy brand as a whole and make sure it's a PlayStation IP going forward, similar to what we've seen with Nintendo and Pokemon as an example. People often forget, but Nintendo doesn't actually own the Pokemon IP, but instead they actually have a large enough stake to keep them exclusive to Nintendo consoles. And I could see Sony pivot to a more future-proof investment like that for Final Fantasy, especially if Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth does well for them, which I fully expect that they will. Keep in mind that there's also rumors that a Final Fantasy IX remake is in development. So I think that could be a big splash move Sony could make here. But, with that said, without a doubt, Sony will be acquiring more studios in the coming years, and that is what this report ensures. Let's go and change pace here, though, and talk about Sega, or more specifically, Atlus and Persona. Yeah, apparently you Persona fans out there have a lot to look forward to, which means I myself have something to be very excited about. I do like the Persona series. So this is coming from Nate the Hate on his podcast, where he noted that Atlus is working on 3 different Persona games that are set to release over the next 18 months. The first of which is the much-rumored Persona 3 remake. Now this has been in the rumor mill for quite some time, and according to Nate, it's finally about to be revealed at, interestingly enough, the Xbox Showcase, out of all places. Now that is a big get for Xbox if true. They've really put a lot of effort into getting the Persona series on both Xbox and Xbox Game Pass. We've seen that over the last 12 months. They got Persona 3, 4, and 5, but the Persona 3 remake would be the first new Persona game to come to Xbox day one. It is a remake, so it's not necessarily a completely new game, but still, this would be a big announcement for them. Now, with that said, Nate did note that it will be a multi-platform game, which I think that's great news. I firmly believe that the Persona series should be multi-platform. More on that in just a second. I think the only thing for me, though, is that if this Persona 3 remake is legitimate, which based on all the smoke that we've heard over the last couple of years, I wouldn't be all that surprised. But I do find its release to be a little bit strange, just because it's another example on why Atlus is such an odd company. If this remake is planned to release, let's hypothetically say this year. All he says is that it's planned within the next 18 months. But let's hypothetically say it comes out this year. Then why did they just port the original Persona 3 to all of these different modern platforms? That to me seems a little counterproductive. These are not short games by any stretch of the means. And if people have recently played the original Persona 3, it will be a tough sell to get them to invest in a remake unless there's some big changes that we don't currently know about. Now, that is a possibility, but I don't know. Atlus is, they're just such a strange company, but even then, they still manage to surprise me, and this would be one of those times if true. Now, Nate also did mention a Persona spinoff that's in development. This is also supposedly set to release before Persona 6, though he didn't exactly go into great detail about this one, but that is the next part here. He point blank said Persona 6 is planned for a 2024 release. Now, he doesn't expect the announcement to be imminent or anything like that, but from what he's hearing, Persona 6 might have some type of PlayStation exclusivity, possibly a timed deal. Now, he didn't seem 100% confident about that, and he noted that Xbox might be trying to make some type of deal with Sega to keep it multi-platform, but that is what he keeps hearing. That would be a big exclusive for Sony, even if it is just timed, but at the same time, and you all have heard me talk about this for, years, I personally feel like the Persona franchise needs to be multi-platform. It has so much potential to grow, especially, I think, on Nintendo. Nintendo is utterly dominant in Japan, where Persona is hugely popular. We even saw with the Persona 5 Royal port, it sold an additional 1 million units in a month's time with the inclusion of Xbox, the Switch, the PlayStation 5, and PC. And that's not even a brand new release. So there's absolutely a crowd that wants Persona on other platforms. And that will only grow more with a day one multi-platform Persona 6. So I hope it's a multi-platform release for the sake of fans and the future growth of the Persona series. But when it comes to Atlus, again, they're always filled with surprises. So I expect nothing to make sense when it comes to them. Here they've been porting all of these different Persona games to other platforms, and then Persona 6 could be an exclusive. This is Atlus we're talking about, so Who really knows? I guess we'll see, though. But let me know what you all think about this in the comments below. Are you excited about any of these games? And let me know what you think about a Persona 3 remake after just receiving the Persona 3 modern port. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, have you played the original Metal Gear Solid 3? Of course, there's rumors swirling that a remake is in development, so I kind of wanted to see if you all have actually played the original, and as you can see here, the majority of you all did say no. 59% said no, while 39% of you said yes. And I think this here is the exact reason that I like remakes. I know some people are getting a little tired of remakes, but these are still great games all these years later, and not only do they bring old fans back to play them again, like myself, I have played the original Metal Gear Solid 3, but it also has potential of reaching an entire new group of players that never played these games back when they originally released. You take a look at something like Resident Evil 4, you take a look at something like the Dead Space remake or the Final Fantasy VII remake, there might be a large group of people out there that haven't played the originals. I mean, some of these games are decades old, and some people might not even have been alive when the originals came out. So I am all for remakes, especially when it comes to great games like Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, I would prefer if they would start with a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake, personally. That's just me. But Metal Gear Solid 3 is technically a prequel, and it could be a great place to start off, especially with it being a fan favorite. But yeah, I'm crossing my fingers that this one is true, and by all indication, it does very much appear to be so, with a maybe soonish announcement. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.